we have no scientific evidence to show that there's a thing called maternal instinct. For years and years and years, I kept thinking, I'm too young. That was always my refrain. What's wrong with me that I'm not feeling this pull toward motherhood that so many of my friends describe? The reason some people feel compelled toward motherhood, I argue, has much more to do with our socialization toward motherhood than with anything that's going on within us genetically or biologically.
I was very excited to be joined on this episode of the podcast by Dr Blackstone, who is a sociologist and author of the book Childfree by Choice, which is all about the child-free movement. This is a subject which I think at times can be quite polarizing, so it was really interesting to have a conversation with someone who's done a lot of research into it and has also made that decision for themselves. Let's get into it. So I thought we would start at the beginning, because we are here to talk about the child-free movement, but this wasn't something that you sort of grew up knowing that maybe that would be a decision that you would make. So I wonder if you could talk us through how you got here.
I can. Yeah, it definitely was not something that I even knew was available to me as an option. So for context, I'm 52, almost 53 years old. So I'm a Gen Xer. My formative years really were the 80s. And I personally grew up believing that I was destined to be a mother. I didn't, that belief didn't come from nowhere. I think like many young girls, I grew up with the idea that motherhood was sort of my, the ultimate end-all be-all, to womanhood. And I imagined myself as a mother, and I prepared myself very well for that role. I enrolled myself in a babysitter certification course when I was 11 years old. Wow. And became a certified babysitter at that age, and actually began babysitting kids in the neighborhood and, through our church at that young age. In fairness to the parents who hired me, I should say that most of them hired me along with my older sister, who was 3 years older. So I had a mentor guiding me and learning how to babysit. So it wasn't that they were just leaving their kids with an 11-year-old, but I really took an interest in learning how to rear kids from a really young age. And I think, on reflection, that was very much cultural. Of course, I got all kinds of kudos for taking an interest in doing that. And over my teen years, I spent many weekends babysitting and enjoyed that role. I was a camp counselor over many summers. So identified as somebody who was good at nurturing kids and, again, expected to become a mother. When I was a grad student, I was a nanny to my nephew for the first 3 months of his life. And I also, backing up, was a nanny during my college years. So, and in high school, I was the head of my church nursery. So I had, all kinds of credentials for motherhood. And then to top that all off, I married my high school sweetheart, Lance, right out of college. So we were very young when we got married, 22 and 23. And, all signs pointed to, parenthood for us. I was ready. I had prepared myself, and we got married young. And of course, even on our wedding day, one of the very first questions we got was, when are you going to start your family? And our answer at that time was, well, we're too young and we want to establish ourselves, whatever that meant. We didn't really know, but we just knew somehow that it wasn't quite the time yet. And so we put it off. And then I decided to go to grad school and thought, well, probably I shouldn't do it while I'm pursuing my PhD. So I'll wait and think about it after that. So for years and years and years, I kept thinking, I'm too young. That was always my refrain. And when I was in my mid-30s, I think it was 35, I had 3 friends share with me within about the course of a month that they were pregnant, happily and intentionally so. And I was happy for my friends. I mean, it was a choice that they wanted to make, and they did. And thankfully, they were able to easily become pregnant, and that was great. But I learned from one of them, she was the same age as me, that her pregnancy was considered a geriatric pregnancy because of our age, 35. And it dawned on me that probably the refrain that I'm too young to become a mother at 35 may no longer apply if it was true that the medical profession would consider my pregnancy to be geriatric. So something else maybe was going on with me that I was putting off motherhood. Yeah. And, at that point, it became, for me, my question was, what's wrong with me that I'm not feeling this pull toward motherhood that so many of my friends describe? And let me say that was the wrong question to ask, because nothing was wrong with me. I mean, there might be all kinds of things wrong with me in other domains. My therapist can answer that question for you. But in terms of my lack of pull toward motherhood, there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. But I only learned that by digging into the literature and the research on motherhood and the science on motherhood. Because I'm a sociologist, my gut response often when I have a question about the way the world works is to go to the sociological research on a question. So I did turn to sociology and research in sociology on motherhood and people who opt in and opt out at this point in my life. And I learned two things. One, there was much less research on the subject of non-parenthood than I expected to find. That doesn't mean there was none. There's a lot of good research, especially that emerged in the 70s and 80s on this topic. But there wasn't as much as I expected to find. And two, I learned that we have no scientific evidence to show that there's a thing called maternal instinct that women magically wake up one day and hear birds chirping and, gallop through a field of flowers and suddenly feel compelled to become mothers. There's not that thing. Yeah. We have a biological clock in the sense that at a certain point, our bodies will no longer allow us to become pregnant. That possibility is cut off biologically at a certain point, yes. But beyond that, the reason some people feel compelled toward motherhood, I argue, has much more to do with our socialization toward motherhood than with anything that's going on within us genetically or biologically. I'm a sociologist, so I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a biologist. So forgive me if I'm using the wrong terms, but it's a social process that drives us toward parenthood more than it is a biological process. We do have a sex drive that drives us instinctually to want to have sex. And on occasion, if we're driven to have sex with a person of the other sex at a time of the month that happens to align, we may become pregnant. Yeah. And as a result, we perpetuate our species. But that has nothing to do with a drive to nurture and rear another human for however long it takes, 18 to 25 to however many years. And it was such a relief to discover that.
I like that that term that you use in the book, maternal socialization, rather than maternal instinct. And I think just sort of, since we're at the beginning of the podcast, you outline a difference between the terms child-free and childless in your book. And I wonder if we could maybe just for our listeners go over the difference between those two and why that's important.
Sure. Yeah, I do. And then I want to complicate it a little bit. But to keep it simple, in the book and generally in my work and when I talk about this, I do try to use the term child-free exclusively because in my own work, I have only interviewed people who have intentionally and explicitly opted out of parenthood. They made the deliberate choice not to become parents. And that's, that is an active choice, especially if you're a heterosexual person who's engaged in sexual relationships with people of the other sex. You have to be active about that choice. So it's those people, it's the people, and whether you're heterosexual or not, you have ways of becoming a parent. So people who opt out of parenthood on purpose, I identify as child-free. And I use the term childless in the book to refer to people who share the identity of non-parenthood, but come to that status not by choice. So due to any set of circumstances, they may experience infertility, they may have wished to find a partner to rear children with, and that never happened for them. So for that reason, they didn't have children. For any number of reasons, people may have desired to become a parent and didn't or couldn't. And childless may feel like a better fit for them rather than child-free. So I do use those two terms to kind of distinguish between those two groups. And in the book, I use the term non-parent to refer to all of us as a collective, because there are many things that we share in common, whether we've opted into this category or not. There's a lot of stigma around not being a parent, and a lot of misunderstanding around that status, whether we've chosen it or not. So there are many things that we share. Now, one thing that I've learned from both the child-free and the childless community is it's not that simple. I mean, the division, it's more of a spectrum, I'm learning from the people that have read my book and people in these communities. And I'm one, I identify as child-free, but it's not as clean a line between childless and child-free as I initially understood when I started this research. And again, I've learned this from the people who are living these lives.
Yeah.
That for some people, they may start out wanting to be parents, desperately wanting to be parents, and even trying to become parents. And for whatever reason, that journey doesn't end in the way that they wished. They never become parents, but they either make peace or even embrace their lives as non-parents and eventually come to identify as child-free. And I think a problem with the model that I have used, the way that I have long thought about these concepts, is that I've been too distinct. I've been really careful about wanting to distinguish between those groups because I have never wanted to make claims about the childless group, which is a category that I have never personally, I've never identified as childless personally. And I've always felt it important to be careful about making claims about a group that I have not personally collected data from. I've only interviewed child-free people. And, when speaking about my own experience, I want to be clear that I've never identified as childless. So I've sort of gone over the top in wanting to distinguish these categories. And as I've done that, I've realized, well, that leaves out all the gray areas and all the ways that we can fall, between those categories. So I do want to honor that it's not as simple as there's only two categories and they're very distinct and they're always distinct.
I like the idea of a spectrum. I think that's it's often the case. It's very reflective of people's experiences to have things less binary in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I wonder because you spoke with people, both men and women, for your book, and I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you understand gender impacting the experience of being child-free in society.
Sure. So going into my work, I was trained as a sociologist of gender, and I still identify that way. So I always have questions about how gender impacts people's experiences in the world and how others respond to them and their presentations of self. So, of course, one of my questions was going to be, how does this experience vary by gender, and how does the process of making a decision about not wanting to be a parent vary by gender? And what I learned from the folks that I spoke with was that, one, motherhood and womanhood are so deeply intertwined. in a way that to disentangle them for some people is it's almost like asking someone. I'll use an example from another sociologist, Judith Lorber, who's another sociologist of gender, says that talking about gender for most people is like fish talking about water. Like you're so immersed in it that you can't even, you don't think about it. Like it's essential to your life, but it's so essential that you don't even notice it.
Yeah.
And I think that is true for womanhood and motherhood for many people, that they are one and the same. That if you're not a mother, how could you be a woman? It's core and essential to womanhood. And I don't think that is true for men and fatherhood. And that really came through in my interviews with people that, yes, men experience pushback when they share that they're not intending to become parents sometimes. That they do experience the stigma of chosen non-parenthood sometimes. They don't experience it to the extent that women do. And they don't get the same, their gender is not questioned in the same way that it is for women.
Yes. Yeah.
So, so it is, it's not to say that men who opt out of parenthood experience no stigma, no pushback. But it is a different experience for women.
Yeah. It's not so closely tied up, I guess, from men in that sense of your identity with your gender.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm speaking about this as a woman, so but I have learned this. I hear this from the men that I've interviewed, and from my husband Lance too, who is a child-free man.
When it comes to misconceptions that people have about child-free people, from all the conversations that you had and the interviews that you did, what were some of the ones that sort of came through for you when you were doing that research?
Well, there were a few assumptions that I went into the research with that were almost immediately just blown out of the water. Okay. That I was very wrong about. So one of those was stupidly, so I'm child-free myself, and I thought, well, I had a great childhood. My parents were great, but I bet everyone else who opts out of parenthood does it because they had miserable childhoods and they must just not want to repeat those. Like, how dumb am I? I'm here to try to undo or speak against all the myths about child-free people, and I go into it with one of the worst ones of all. And I learned very quickly that is not true. I mean, it is true for some child-free people, but I heard from more people than not that, and really thoughtfully from many of the people that I interviewed, that their parents did parenthood brilliantly, or they did it well, or at least okay. And that watching their parents do parenthood helped them understand how much is involved and required of parents, especially to do it well. And but many of them appreciated the job that their parents did, and B, they decided, there are so many ways to live a life of meaning, and so many ways to contribute to the world. Yeah. And this is one, but if I choose this one, it means there may be these 87 other things that I can't do. And I want to do these 87 other things. So I'm making a choice not to do this thing so that I can do these other things. And it truly, I mean, I hope I think I was one of the biggest dummies. Like, I hope other people don't have the impression that I had, but it was truly an eye-opener for me to learn all of these people did not have miserable childhoods. They actually made a very thoughtful and considered choice about opting out of parenthood. And it wasn't a a knee-jerk response to a terrible childhood. So that was one of the big eye-openers for me personally.
I think that's a good, like, kind of lead into my next question, which is something that you mentioned in the book. There's a difference, you've got biological reproduction and you've also got social reproduction. And I wondered if you could talk our listeners through what that means.
Yeah. So one of my own soapbox issues around discussions of child-free people is the idea that we don't have families. Every time I get the sense that somebody is making an assumption that I don't have a family because my family is a family of two, I just bristle at that idea. And because of that, as I've been doing this research for almost 20 years now, I really was motivated to learn more about the research on families and what are families really, how do sociologists think about families, and what functions do they fulfill, why do we form families. And what I learned from the sociology of families is that sociologists really view families as providing multiple functions for society. We provide a safe haven for our members. We provide a place to sort of recharge from the difficulties of the world. We provide economically for our members. We provide a household for our members. And then another biggie that families, important role that families fulfill for society is this idea of providing new members of society, the reproduction. And most of us, we hear that word and we instantly go to biological reproduction, which probably every listener understands what that is: creating new humans, bringing new humans into the world. But there's another piece of reproduction that is essential for a functioning society. I'm saying this from the United States, which is only a partially functioning society at this point. So I don't know that I'm an authority on what a functioning society is. So take this all with a grain of salt. But when societies work, we also perform social reproduction. And I would argue that is as important and perhaps even more important. Some of us may have been falling down at the job in recent years. Sorry, I can't keep out my political commentary. I apologize. And social reproduction is all of the stuff that we do to help rear the next generation. So, we create new humans, but at the point that they're created, they don't yet understand how to get along in the world. I mean, they have many, many needs and they have a lot to learn. And it isn't just the two people who created them that are responsible for helping them do that.
Yeah.
So they have teachers who, help them learn reading, writing, arithmetic, all that kind of stuff. They have counselors and social workers who help them deal with all of the tough stuff in life. They have mentors who help them, guide them in all kinds of ways. They have camp counselors, they have friends, they have any number of people in their lives who help teach them the norms and values and beliefs of whatever culture and society that they're growing up in. And those people may be parents and they may not be parents. And child-free people play essential roles in the lives of children and young adults. This is documented in plenty of research, but we know that kids and young adults need adults in their lives who are not their parents. And this is another thing that came up again over and over in my interviews with child-free people, that they are deeply engaged and invested in the lives of children and play very important roles in the social reproduction of the next generation.
And I wonder, I guess too, for a lot of those people, they have more time and possibly energy to give to those kids in their lives because they don't have kids of their own, so they get to give more of themselves in that socially reproductive way.
They do. the time question, that's another one that's like, well, do we or do we not? I mean, it depends on how we opt to spend our own time. But we have different kinds of available time, and the resources question is another one. I mean, I think one of the ways that child-free people get dismissed, and sometimes we contribute to this myth, is the idea that, oh, we have all kinds of money that we're spending frivolously because we're not spending it on children. There are child-free people living in poverty. There are child-free people who struggle to make ends meet. We're not all living in the lap of luxury. It's true. If you look at the demographics, that more the child-free people, that this is a choice that people are making in nations where our basic needs are already being met, and where women have access to education, have access to employment, have access to health care. So yes, this is a phenomenon among more privileged populations. That is true. But it doesn't mean that everybody who's making this choice is running around with millions of dollars and frivolously spending it.
Hi, we wanted to quickly ask you if you could please subscribe to Sex and Space. Every click of that button helps us to keep doing the work that we do and bring you more great podcast episodes like this one. Don't just listen, commit, subscribe, and stay in our orbit. And I want to come back to something you said, you said like you've been doing this research for 20 years now. And how have you seen people's attitudes towards the child-free movement change in that time?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think one reflection of the attitude shift is the fact that we're having this very conversation, and that I have conversations like this with podcasters and media people regularly. And when I started this work, I wasn't getting, I mean, part of it is that I published a book, so it's easier to find me, but I was doing I'm a public sociologist and have been for a long time. So my commitment is to spread the word about sociology and to share sociological insights and research beyond the ivory tower, outside of academics. And to get this topic covered in everyday media or in digestible, accessible ways was a much bigger challenge than it is today. So the fact that more people are wanting to talk about it and more media sources are wanting to cover it, I think is a signal that we're more accepting of it. Now, if you look at the comments in some of these media pieces, we know there's still a lot of hostility toward child-free people. But we're more visible than we were 20 years ago, certainly. And when I was growing up, this wasn't even a discussion. I mean, like I said, and it's still true. I know there are still people growing up that have no idea that this is an option to them. But I didn't even have a book that I could see at the library or at a bookstore that indicated that this was a choice. And my book is just one of many today that are available to people to get some insight about what it's like to live this life, pros and cons, and what other people's lives look like who make this choice. So we are moving toward, to me, visibility is a sign of acceptance. So we are more visible, which I take as a sign of greater acceptance.
Would you be willing to speak to some of those pros and cons of living that kind of lifestyle from your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggies, actually, that has been front and center for Lance and me in recent last 5 years. You mentioned our podcast, Nevertheless Persisting, which is largely focused on our current experience as long COVID sufferers and survivors. So I've been dealing with long COVID since I was an early adopter. I got COVID-19 right out of the gate in March 2020. And have had long COVID ever since. Lance got COVID-19 in 2023, and he's dealing with a milder case of long COVID than mine, but he has it too now. And so we're both these kind of brain foggy, very tired zombies walking around our house now. And I add that to me, I have vertigo and nausea all the time too, and occasional migraines. And for us, being able to focus on ourselves as we navigate life with chronic illness now has frankly been a relief and a blessing. I mean, I am now learning how to live as a person with a chronic illness rather than for the first few years in my own journey. It was fighting against this and hating I still hate it, but being so angry that I was sick, and fighting against it every step of the way. And now I'm learning how to live with it. But this whole process has taken so much of my energy and time that the thought of rearing children at the same time is frankly unimaginable to me. I know that there are many people with my very same condition who are as sick and even sicker than me who are doing it. And so I'm not saying it's impossible. And I know some of those people personally who say, I'm so glad I have my kids because they keep me sane. They provide me joy. So not everyone's experience is my own, but for Lance and me, it has been, we are glad that it's just the two of us right now, because we can dig in and whatever energy we have can be focused on nurturing each other and our relationship and learning to get through this illness together. So that's one of the pros for us. A real con for me, really over the course of my career, has been the experience of not feeling like I'm an equal in all work settings in terms of work-life balance and honoring and respecting my family at the same level that other families are respected in the workplace. So the idea that a meeting has to end on time, or that someone can leave a meeting if it's going overtime because they have family commitments. And this has happened more times than I can count over my 22 years of my current career, that I'll be in a meeting and someone will say, oh, I'm so sorry, I've got to leave early. My kid has a doctor's appointment, or I got to get my kid to soccer practice, or whatever. And everyone's very understanding. And I am too, because I think people have lives outside of work. I don't think anybody's life priority should be their job. We have more complex and deeper lives than our freaking paid jobs, frankly. So I'm totally cool with that. But I wish that people were equally cool with me saying, I'm so sorry, I have a family commitment and I need to leave now. But when I say that, everyone knows that I don't have children. So when I say I have a family commitment, the word family is triggering for people. Because they're like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, what the fuck is Amy's family? Like, she doesn't have a family. She has her husband. And that is maddening to me. Yeah. In the past, we had a cat who's now no longer with us. But, maybe I had to take my cat to the vet. Or maybe I had my yoga class to get to, which frankly centers me and allows me to stay at work and not fly off the handle at you in a meeting, because that's what I need to stay balanced. And that has been a big challenge for me. And I know from the folks that I interviewed for my book that other child-free people have had that experience and share that frustration.
So there was a social worker that you referenced in chapter 7, Carolyn Morel, and she said that the threat of regret is one way that pronatalism is promoted. And so I wanted to talk about that and ask you, when people say, oh, well, if, you don't have kids, you're going to regret it, and who to look after you when you're old. And, people use this notion of regret to try and convince childfree people that they've made a mistake. What's your response to that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, how dumb. That's my first response. Like, what the hell? Does anybody ever say to someone who's newly pregnant, oh my God, you might regret this? Like, no, that would be absurd. So why do the same thing to somebody who's made a different life choice? It's ridiculous. But yes, I mean, there's a reason for it. And it effectively promotes motherhood, right? It effectively does the state's bidding, and creates new humans for the nation state.
Yeah.
But it's not actually, it's not a well thought out worry, because the idea, well, one, fine, it's possible that people will regret their choice not to have kids. It's also possible that people will regret their choice to have kids, or may regret their choice to pursue a particular career, or to choose the chicken sandwich for lunch, or whatever, or to marry so and so. There are so many choices that we may or may not regret, first of all, that are either changeable or not. Some are changeable and some are not. And at a certain point, we have to make a decision about what we're going to do with our lives. Two, the data, the research do not bear out the claim that we might regret our decision. I mean, there's certainly room for more research on this question, but what we know so far from research on the question of whether or not child-free people will regret their choice is that they're not going to regret their choice. People who, again, make the intentional choice to opt out of parenthood don't tend to regret that choice, tend to have perfectly, satisfactory to actually happy experiences aging and growing old.
Yeah.
And even better, people who identify as childless tend to be happy in their older years too. So even folks who wanted to become parents eventually come to make peace with the reality that they didn't. The one exception to that is men who wanted to become parents but didn't. That is one group to maybe look into and to do some intervention around. That's the group that tends to maybe not fare as well. Okay. And I think that has a lot to do, this is me hypothesizing now, I have no research to back this up, but I'm wondering if that has to do with community and social connections, because what we know from the work on child-free people is that they are more deeply embedded in their communities. They have strong social networks, and they create families of choice that include people that they didn't create themselves, and that they're not necessarily related to by blood. And so as they age, they have these really these deeper community networks that they can rely on. And we also know from research that women tend to be more likely to have those kinds of connections than men do. So I wonder if that's the difference between childless women and men as they age, if those women have already formed more deep and just more connections with people in their communities who care for them and that they can rely on as they're aging, which of course increases life satisfaction and happiness and joy. that childless men may not have, or may be less likely to have, and that may be what explains the fact that their well-being is not as high as older child-free people's and older childless women's well-being. I don't know. It's a theory I'm throwing out there.
Is that something that you would be interested in doing research into?
In a world where I did not have long COVID and wasn't sleeping 14 hours a day, yes. So this is a call to all the long COVID researchers out there to find us a cure ASAP,
Yeah.
so I can get on that.
I thought I would sort of wrap up by asking you, if there's like something that you would want your younger self to know about this decision or the child-free movement, what message would you have?
Oh, as a younger person, I would like to know that, first of all, that parenthood is a choice, and it's one of any number of paths that a person can pursue as they enter adulthood. And there's also any number of ways to pursue parenthood. It's not limited to, having a heterosexual identity and partnering with a person of the other sex for the rest of your life. I mean, there are so many ways to be a parent, first of all. So I would have loved to understand that. And I would also have loved to know that I didn't have to pursue that path. And then also that just because I happened to be born with the set of chromosomes that identified me as female, and then I got slapped with this label of girl and then woman because I was born with that set of chromosomes, that didn't mean that I also was destined to become a mother. I'm so over. We still have you can still Google girls' toys and boys' toys, and you still find all the kitchen sets for girls and the baby dolls for girls and all that crap. And I'm not saying we have to do away with that crap, but can we do away with labeling it for particular gender identities? Can we do away with associating it with gender?
Yeah.
That would have been awesome as a kid.
Because those things, they start, and it's so, no one's directly telling you, hey, I'm giving you this toy, therefore you're going to be a mother in your future. It's all so, very unconscious, and all this messaging that comes in from the toys that we have access to, what we see in the media around us, we just absorb it. And so it becomes this unconscious belief that we're destined to be a mother.
Yeah, I grew up going to equal rights amendment rallies with my mother, who, I think I was raised by a feminist. I don't know if she would use that word herself, but I was raised by a woman who raised me to be a strong woman. She put me in assertiveness training when I was a kid. Like, she wanted me to be an assertive kid and an assertive girl. I never got Barbies. I got the Sunshine Family instead of Barbies, which was this hippie family that lived on a farm and did all their own, like, knitting and weaving and grew their own vegetables. So, like, it's not that I was necessarily even conditioned in my own family to believe these things. But I also got baby this and that because that's what I wanted. And she peed. You could feed her water and she would pee, and I could change her diaper. And I do have memories of changing her diaper, and it wasn't my mom, but a relative watching me do it and being like, oh my God, Amy's, such an expert at, isn't it adorable how Amy knows how to change a diaper? And those messages sink into you, like I know that at some level I was learning that I'm an excellent mother. Even at however, 5, 6, 7, however old I was when I was changing baby this and that.
Yeah. Those are the messages that were coming in for you that you were absorbing.
Yeah.
And just before we wrap up, is there any question I haven't asked or anything that you'd like to share with our listeners on this subject?
Oh, gosh. I think just to share with listeners, I hope that they I mean, we've been talking about this for an hour now, but I hope that they know that whatever choice they make for themselves is their choice, and that there are resources available to them. Obviously, I want everyone to buy my own book, but there are so many other resources available to them to get a glimpse into what it's like to live a child-free life, and also to live a life as a parent. And I'm sure people are surrounded by others in their own lives that they can talk to about those paths. And it's okay to take your time in making a decision that feels right for you. And it's okay to make the decision that feels right for you. That's it.
That's a lovely message. And where can listeners find you and your book and get in touch and stay connected with the work that you're doing and your podcast?
So my website, amyblackstonephd.com, is probably the easiest place to, there you can find my book, links to the podcast. I've got a Substack too. So the podcast and the Substack are both called Nevertheless Persisting. And again, amyblackstonepphd.com, you can find everything else. I'm on Instagram too. You can find me just through my name.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. Amy, it was so lovely to chat with you. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.